Miss Martha was 40 years old, and she wasn't married. She had a good heart and $2,000 in the bank. Many women marry who have less. Martha wasn't married, but she always showed a smiling face to the people who came every day to buy bread in her little bakery. A middle-aged man came to the bakery 2 or 3 times a week. He had light brown hair and blue eyes. His clothes were not new, but always very clean. He always bought 2 loaves of stale bread, never fresh, and Miss Martha decided that he was very poor. He had long, very white hands. She could see that he wasn't a workman. Perhaps he is an artist, she thought, a poor artist living in a cold, dark room and painting beautiful pictures. She often thought of him when she sat down to her dinner of meat and vegetables, and bread and butter, and tea and jam. She thought of him sitting alone in his cold, dark corner, eating his dry, stale bread. How sorry she was that she could not invite him to have dinner with her. She wanted to talk to him, to know more about him, but how? He never spoke to her, except to ask for 2 loaves of stale bread. At last she thought of a plan which, she hoped, would not only help her to discover his profession, but would also let her begin a conversation with him. In her room behind the shop, Miss Martha had a painting which she always liked to look at. It was a painting of a wonderful white palace on an island in a lake. There was a little boat on the blue water of the lake. Miss Martha brought the painting from her room and put it on the wall just behind the place where she kept the loaves of bread. The next day the man came in and said, as usual, 2 loaves of stale bread, please. As Miss Martha turned to him with the loaves of bread, her heart began to beat more quickly. She saw that he was looking at her picture. There was even a smile on his face. "You have a fine picture here, madam," he said as she handed him the bread. "I am glad you think so," Miss Martha answered. "It is my favorite picture." She turned and looked at the picture. "I admire art so much," she said. "Do you think it is a good picture?" The man looked at the picture again, this time more carefully, then said, "Yes, the picture isn't bad, not bad at all, but I'm afraid the proportions of the palace aren't quite right." He took the bread without saying anything else and left the shop. Miss Martha went to the window and looked after him. How nice he was! She was sure now that he was an artist and living on stale bread. Often now when he came he stopped to talk a few minutes to Miss Martha. He seemed to like her smile, the sound of her voice, her conversation, but he continued to buy only stale bread. Never a cake, never even a loaf of fresh bread. He looked thinner, she thought, and unhappy. How she wanted to put something good into the parcel together with his stale bread. But she hadn't enough courage for that. She knew how proud artists were, how they hated gifts in any form. One day her artist came in and asked, as usual, for 2 loaves of stale bread. Miss Martha had just turned to the shelf to get the loaves when there was a great noise in the street. The artist ran to the door to look, and at that moment a great idea came to Miss Martha's mind. On the lower shelf there was a big piece of fresh butter that she had bought that morning. Miss Martha took a knife, made a hole in each loaf of bread, and put a big piece of butter in it. When the artist turned round, she had already made a paper parcel with the 2 loaves in it. When the artist had left, after a very pleasant little conversation, Miss Martha smiled to herself, but her heart was beating faster than usual. She hoped the artist would not be angry about such a small thing. Nobody thought of butter as a gift. She thought of what was happening in the artist's room. It was lunchtime. Her artist had stopped painting and was looking at his beautiful picture, in which the proportions were quite right. Soon he would sit down to his cup of tea and dry bread, and he would break one of the loaves. Ah, would he think as he ate of the hand that had put the butter into that loaf? Would he? The bell over the shop door rang loudly, and 2 men came in. One of them was a young man she had never seen before. The other was her artist's. The artist's face was very red. His hat was on the back of his head. His eyes were wild. "You foolish old woman!" he shouted at Miss Martha. At Miss Martha! The younger man tried to pull him away. "No, I won't go," the artist cried, freeing his arm. "I won't go until I tell her." Then to Miss Martha, "You have ruined my life. You have ruined everything. You are a foolish old cat." Miss Martha closed her eyes. She felt that the shelves full of bread were going around her in great circles. The young man took the artist's arm again. "You've said enough. Come on." He pulled the angry artist to the door and pushed him into the street. Then he closed the door and came back to Miss Martha. "I'll explain what happened," he said. I couldn't while he was in the room. You see, he's an architect. We work together in the same office. He has worked hard for 6 months, drawing a plan for a new city hall. It was a prize competition. He finished his plan today. You know, an architect always makes his drawing in pencil first and then draws over the lines in ink. When it is finished, he takes away the pencil lines with stale bread. It's better than rubber. My friend bought his stale bread here. Well, today, well, you know, butter isn't very good for, well, he can't show that plan to anybody now. Miss Martha went into her room behind the shop. She took off the silk blouse and put on her old brown one. Then she sat down and cried.